Thank you very much indeed, Yvonne. When I saw the title of this particular session, I must say the only implication that I could draw was that the political system is to blame for the mess we're in. And I'm afraid I don't agree. I certainly don't agree that it's as simple as that. The political system may take a share of the blame, but let's be quite clear. Responsibility for the depth of the crisis rests squarely with traceable decisions of the governments that preceded the crash. And it's necessary to say that, because blaming the political system is the new version of sure ye are all the same. Now, there may be some people, some visitors from outside here who don't know that phrase, but it's a defensive cry induced by osmosis in hardline Fianna Fáil supporters when approached by members of another tribe and when they can no longer defend the actions of their own tribe, defending the indefensible. You know, examples might be wrecking the economy, signing affidavits when memory fails, or maybe an entire political party claiming to live in Glenties for expenses purposes. In holiday cottages owned by Nama. So this sure ye are all the same movement are exclusively supporters of the dominant party, and they may be correct that we are all the same. But we can't know that because they have elected the same party to lead government since 1987. The 1994-97 Rainbow government was an accident, and it tended to show that we're not all the same. One party has established a hegemony over every level of Irish society. In the process, it has drawn into question even the traditional independence of the public service. And the question must be asked, why didn't the dog bark before the crash? Whether our political system can provide effective governance is a question that has become elevated in recent times from the bar stool to the forefront of public debate because of the sudden and calamitous change in our national economic fortunes. The worst recession in living memory, the waste of public money, the collapse of the banks, and a decade of tribunals have combined to undermine public confidence, not just in this government, but in the institutions of government. Unfortunately, the debate about the effectiveness of our political system has become narrowed to the suitability of the electoral system. And I will argue that whether our political system can provide effective governance is determined by factors that go beyond our electoral system. And I believe that much of the debate on the electoral system, much of the commentary I read, is ill-informed, and much of it is ill thought out. I believe that considered institutional reform is necessary and urgent. I fully understand the impulse to lash out at the political system when so many people have been deprived of their livelihoods, so many more losing their homes, others, new generation, facing the challenge of forced immigration. There is no denying that homegrown decision-making has contributed enormously to this crisis. Therefore, our political system has not provided the protection that could reasonably be expected by our citizens. And the question is why? In acknowledging that our political system bears a share of responsibility for the crisis, I want to make the simple, unchallengeable point that dereliction of duty by government is separate from weaknesses in the political system. Wrong decisions and a propensity to avoid decisions for reasons of self-serving cronyism in the years preceding the crash have made our crisis so much worse. Wrong decisions by government should not be conveniently filed away under defects in the political system. Proponents of change to the electoral system argue that if only we could change the electoral system and halve the number of TDs, the quality of governance would automatically improve. Well, maybe it would, but I think we need to talk about that. Why would fewer TDs concentrate on the business of government and not give a damn about being re-elected? In this small polity, if I am a single member for a particular constituency, I will face more fierce competition than I face now. Can you imagine the present Fianna Fáil party having to contest an election in single-seat constituencies at the moment? A terrible beauty might be born, but a lot of people here mightn't see it that way. Some argue that the new electoral system should facilitate the fast tracking of high achievers directly into cabinet without these outstanding individuals being overly put upon by the electorate. For these advocates of change, the question seems to be, how could an electoral system be devised that would transfer Michael O'Leary and Bill Cullen, Peter Sutherland and Dr. Ed Walsh directly into government? Throw in a star journalist or two and we'll never face another poor day. I don't think it's as simple as that. The proposition seems to be that in our system of proportional representation in multi-seat constituencies, members of Dáil Éireann are so oppressed by the clientelist culture that the business of governance suffers. And maybe it does. And Jim Hussey has made a strong argument tonight that it does. And if it does, we should consider how best to change it. But it's my own conviction that the explanation for the failures of our political system goes far beyond the electoral system. Later this week, the Committee on the Constitution will publish its report on this important issue, and the debate that Gemma has kicked off, I hope, will be conducted rigorously and robustly in the press. I think there's also something of the urban myth about the widespread belief that ministers are prevented from attending to their portfolios because of the daily demands of constituents. Not everybody may know that ministers have between 6 and 9 civil servants in their offices to ensure that constituents don't get near them and they can concentrate on affairs of government. Now, some of you may think it would be a good idea that they shouldn't concentrate on matters of government, but I'm making the point that they have staffs deliberately designed to avoid that pressure. According to Article 28 of Bunreacht na hÉireann, the government shall be responsible to Dáil Éireann. In practice, power within our system is centralised to government. The independent existence of Parliament and thus its capacity to hold government to account has become gradually more eroded over the last 20 years. More than ever before, government proposes and Parliament disposes. Dáil reform is only part of the solution. Oppositions are in favour of Dáil reform, but when oppositions become governments, their zeal somewhat abates. The potential of the committee system, for example, is enormous, but not with constrained powers. Government has established too many committees in order to reward government backbenchers and so as to maintain control. A small parliament of 166 members cannot service 23 Dáil committees, 20 of them chaired by government deputies. During the boom, opposition spokespersons were often supplanted in the media by some of these chairpersons, articulating opposition-style concerns and counselling this minister or that to change direction. It's all part of the almost total domination of the system by the executive or by government. For example, I believe that a parliamentary power of inquiry is necessary and intrinsic to the proper functioning of a representative, responsible parliamentary democracy. I believe that the state is the poorer and has functioned more poorly in the absence of a system where those who exercise authority in the state can be called to account for their performance in office. More than 10 years ago, the Dirt Inquiry demonstrated the capacity of parliamentary inquiry when it speedily, economically and effectively investigated allegations of tax evasion and recouped more than €1 billion for the public purse. People who exercised authority in the state system and in our banks were held to account, and they didn't like it. Consequently, when the subsequent inquiry into the shooting at Abbey Lara was struck down, the word was put out that it was the end of inquiry by parliamentary committee. I believe that the Abbey Lara inquiry myself ought never have been embarked upon, because parliamentarians should not put themselves in a position where they might be expected to adjudicate on an unlawful killing. However, it was not, I believe, the intention of the Supreme Court to kill off inquiry by parliamentary committee. I published the Committees of the Houses of the Oireachtas Powers of Inquiry Bill in February of this year, in order to restore the power of inquiry by parliamentary committee and to bring the law into compliance with the Supreme Court judgment. Dr. Gerard Hogan, SC, an acknowledged expert on the Constitution, told the Irish Times at the time, and I quote him, "Abbey Lara, while causing difficulties, did not slam the door shut, as many believe." He highlighted the distinction where the Supreme Court held that it was unconstitutional for the committee to make a finding that a named person committed an act of homicide, and an inquiry, for example, into the banking crisis. The government voted down that bill, a decision that would have met with the approval of senior civil servants who don't want to see the revival of a dirt-style inquiry by parliamentary committee. If there are government proposals to refurbish the law to permit inquiry by parliamentary committee, they're a bit like Colin McCarthy's earlier slides tonight. They're invisible. I have argued elsewhere and at some length for the revision of the 1924 Ministers and Secretaries Act to clarify the respective roles of the Minister and the Secretary-General. The 1997 Public Service Management Act seems to have only added to the confusion, a confusion that both Sir Humphrey and the Minister are very happy with. This ministerial departmental pact involves an abnegation of public personality on the part of civil servants and an excessive fascination with the role of the Minister. In return for defending his department, as if its actions were all his own, the Minister is guaranteed that he will never walk alone and never be short of something to say in his own defence. In 2010, nobody in this room seriously believes that ministers should be accountable for every letter that goes missing, for every deportation order that is misfiled, and for every lapse when an official is out sick. And yet, this 19th century notion of personal ministerial responsibility, coupled with legal ministerial responsibility for all official departmental acts, and the legal competence of civil servants to perform such acts, without any necessary recourse to the Minister, all lead to a situation where accountability to the Oireachtas is demanded on an entirely fictitious basis. Both sides of the House know this to be so, yet that does not prevent both sides acting out their adversarial roles. During the last decade or so, the issues of civil service reform, strategic management initiatives, and so on, has meant that constitutional accountability, as delivered through the Convention of Ministerial Responsibility, has become fused with and by the managerial accountability. Can I remind you of what Sir Humphrey said about this? Sir Humphrey Appleby said, you remember in that series, and I quote him, "When a minister actually starts to run his department, things are going pretty badly. It is not the minister's job to run the department. It's my job, for which I have 25 years training and practice. If the minister were allowed to run the department, we should have 1, chaos, 2, innovations, 3, public debate, and 4, outside scrutiny." Now, that's plainly an appalling vista. And remember, the same Mandarin went on to define the role of the minister. And he said he had 3 functions. He said a minister's job is to act as an advocate. He makes the department's actions seem plausible to Parliament and the public. 2, he's our man in Westminster, steering our legislation through Parliament. And 3, he is our breadwinner. His duty is to fight at Cabinet for the money that we need to do the job. Now, a lot of politicians accept that that's their job description, defending the department in the Dáil and to the public, steering the department's business through the Houses of the Oireachtas, fighting the corner in the battle in the estimates, by and large a kind of ambassador at large, a kind of Colonel Sanders of Kentucky Fried Chicken. I believe that legislation should be enacted to permit the delegation by the minister of specific ministerial powers to specific officers who would, to the extent of the authority delegated to them, be accountable both within the department and also directly to the Oireachtas for the exercise of those powers. Delegation orders should spell out the function of the minister in relation to supervision of the exercise of that delegated power. When a cock-up occurs at the moment, ministers and civil servants circle the wagons and engage in collective self-defence. The minister's impenetrable corporate shroud envelops them all and protects them from individual examination and accountability. We need increased accountability from officials, but this must be in addition to, rather than in substitution for, ministerial accountability. We need a more appropriate distinction between the functions of the minister and of his senior officials. Not knowing that something has happened is not an appropriate excuse when a minister should have known. Neither is failing to intervene when the minister should have done so, or failing to ensure that they are kept informed of potential as well as actual problems. Ministers are accountable for what happened on their watch, but not because of an arcane legal fiction that whatever went wrong, they did it themselves. When it comes to accountability, the main issues are first, whether the minister has been negligent or incompetent in the overall supervision of his department, and second, whether the minister responds adequately when things go wrong. Ministers cannot escape their supervisory role. If they're called to resign, such calls should be solidly grounded in the reality of that role rather than fixing them with knowledge of the actions of others. We need to redefine the relationship between ministers and their departments. I would make 3 proposals in that regard. If the minister takes a decision personally, he or she should say so and account for it. If the decision is taken by the department under a delegated power, then the relevant named official should say so and account for it. The minister, thirdly, would then have to account for the degree of supervision that he or she exercised over the department in relation to the exercise within it of delegated powers. Senior civil servants are major players within our political system, and they should get credit for their achievements, and they should take responsibility when their decisions turn out badly. Civil service rules that were designed to give effect to the principle that ministerial responsibility protects officials from public accountability are now outdated. One further reform refers to our system of public expenditure decision-making and the need for parliamentary oversight. At present, the estimates are considered by the relevant Select Committee halfway through the financial year. The Public Accounts Committee does its job effectively and well, but it's an audit committee and examines for value for money after the event. There has been developed a generally accepted set of principles of taxation, rules and norms by which tax systems and taxation proposals may be measured and examined. Only more recently have we begun to turn the spotlight on principles of public expenditure. In a report that I prepared for the Public Accounts Committee in 2005, amongst other things, I recommended that the estimates formation cycle, the campaign, including the bilateral negotiations between line departments and the Department of Finance, commence much earlier, in perhaps January, and end by the summer. This happens, for example, in Netherlands and Germany. The idea was that there would be what might be termed a whole budgetary cycle. The ex-ante phase of the estimates, followed by Budget Day, followed by the Finance Act, and concluding with the ex-post aspect, principally the audit work of the Controller and Auditor General and the examination of his report by the Public Accounts Committee. Departments would be examined division by division and spending programme by spending programme, so as to work out what was intended, what was done to achieve that intention, what, if any, delays were encountered, what, if any, money was wasted. When was the last time this subject matter was thoroughly reviewed, and so on. Accountability, quality of advice, and I haven't dealt with that at much length, but it's been referred to by some other colleagues on the panel. Accountability, quality of advice, a system of parliamentary inquiry, reform of the Ministers and Secretaries Act, reform of the estimates and budgetary cycle, and reform of the Dáil's own procedures. All of these, I believe, would better enhance the capacity of our political system to deliver effective governance than simply testing the mood of the people on changing the electoral system to accommodate a more remote elite who may or may not do a better job. Thank you very much.